And a little about me. I'm Chuck. I graduated from the University of California, Berkeley in 2016. I had a great college life. I was in a fraternity, studied hard, and even met my fiancée, Rosie, there. But look, if you had asked me what I thought of Berkeley my freshman year, I would have given you a very different answer. I was a lost freshman, surrounded by people who talked about their great achievements and planned for the future. Everyone was focused on the next 30 years of their lives, and to be honest, that made me a little uncomfortable. But it was a growing experience, and looking back, I'm grateful to have experienced it all. You know, if you wanted to get any kind of opportunity in the business world, having a strong LinkedIn profile was practically mandatory. I remember the stress of creating a professional online image, as if my future depended on who I connected with and the skills I listed. It was a lot of pressure. Even so, I did everything right. I connected with the right people, listed my skills, and started looking for a summer internship. It wasn't long before my inbox pinged with a message that really caught my attention. And to my surprise, it wasn't one of those automated or spam messages. It was a prestigious business company that was interested in my profile. I was so surprised that I read the message about 6 times before responding, just to make sure it was real. After a brief exchange of messages, they invited me for a first interview. Then the marathon of preparation began. I spent hours researching everything about the company, trying to understand what to expect, and I looked for all the sample questions I could find on the internet. It was then that I received another message, this time from a guy named Armin Slawinski. He would be my interviewer. And of course, the first thing I did was stalk the guy to find out more about him. But do you know what happened? All that excitement I felt gave way to total confusion. I started looking at Armin's LinkedIn profile, trying to find out more about him before our interview. But to my surprise, I found nothing. No professional information, no social media, nothing at all. I thought it was a bit strange, but I thought maybe he was a private person and preferred to keep everything private. So I let it go. We set a date for the interview, and he gave me the address. When I looked it up on my phone, I saw that the interview would be at a random coffee shop in Oakland. That's when I started to think it was all a bit weird. Why not do the interview in Berkeley? Our college town had several coffee shops that were perfect for this. But since the address seemed normal, I tried not to worry too much. The day before the interview, I told my friend Riley everything. He was even more confused than I was. He said that the situation seemed a bit suspicious. And to be honest, I agreed with him, but I also thought, it's worth a try after all, it's a great opportunity. Riley asked me how I was going to get there, and I said I was going by Uber. That's when he offered to give me a ride, since he had nothing to do at that time. I thanked him and accepted his offer. What I didn't know is that if Riley hadn't offered, I might not even be here to tell this story. The next day, at 4 p.m., Riley showed up at my dorm to pick me up. I was super nervous. After all, it was one of my first interviews. I got in the car and, about 20 minutes later, we were already close to the location. I asked Riley to drop me off on the street before arriving because, I don't know, I thought it was a bit strange to be seen asking a friend to drop me off for an interview. I thanked him and, to my surprise, he said he would wait for me. I asked if he was sure, and he laughed, pulling a giant bag of weed from the dashboard of the car. I laughed and got out, closing the door. I walked a few minutes to the address and, suddenly, I stopped in my tracks. I stood frozen, staring at the scene in front of me. A huge construction site. There was no coffee shop at all. The strangest thing was that the entire area didn't even look residential. All the buildings around it were either closed or privately owned. I was super confused. I checked the address on my phone twice and, yes, it was the right place. But it looked like the entire block had been demolished recently. So recently that even Google Maps hadn't updated yet. I picked up my phone to call Riley, but before I could do so, I heard a super loud voice behind me. "Chuck!" someone shouted. When I turned around, I came face to face with an absurdly tall man wearing a black suit that looked very expensive. At that moment, I thought, thank God, this isn't a trap. His presence was quite imposing, but at the same time, he seemed totally out of place in the middle of that abandoned scene. Oh, and I can't forget to mention the car next to him. A matte black Bentley. Seriously, it was one of those cars you only see in movies. He walked toward me with a slightly confused look on his face. We shook hands, and I, even more confused, asked about the construction site. He looked as surprised as I was, frowning and putting his hand on his chin, as if he was thinking about something. "Do you know why we can't find another place?" he asked, pointing to the Bentley. Then he walked back to the car and said over his shoulder, "Get in." The car doors opened, and the man, without saying a word, sat in the front seat. He seemed very excited. I followed him, but first I walked around the car just to admire the Bentley more closely. I couldn't miss this opportunity, but then something made me stop. I looked at the back seat and, instead of seeing those super luxurious leather seats that you expect in a car like this, I saw something that sent a chill down my spine. Lying on the floor, hidden by the shadows, was a man, and he was holding something long and metal. At that moment, panic took over me. My mind started racing, trying to understand what was happening. Was this a trap? Without thinking twice, I took a few steps back and started running as fast as I had ever run in my life. I heard the man shout my name, but I didn't even have the courage to look back. As I ran, what I feared most happened. The sound of tires screeching. I quickly looked over my shoulder and saw the Bentley turning the corner, headed straight for me. At that moment, my brain went into full survival mode. I knew I couldn't outrun a car. There was no way I could just escape. The streets around me were a veritable maze, and fear ran through my veins like never before. I reached a crossroads and there was my choice. Left or right? Logic told me to turn left. It was the shortest route. But before I could think too much, my feet decided for me and I turned right. I dashed down the street, knowing that I had very few seconds, maybe 10 or 20 at most. Then, by some miracle, I saw a building with a fire escape, and it looked low enough for me to jump. With all the strength I had, I jumped and grabbed the ladder. I had never done a pull-up in my life, but at that moment it was life or death. I climbed the ladder as fast as I could, my hands shaking with fear. As I got higher, the Bentley turned the corner and stopped right in front of the building. I couldn't see the driver clearly, but I knew he was there, looking right at me. My heart was racing. I knew that if he decided to follow me, I would have to fight. The next minute seemed to last an eternity. The car sat there for a while longer, then sped down the street, turning left and disappearing. Couldn't breathe. I grabbed my phone and called Riley, practically screaming, telling him what had happened. I stood on the fire escape until he arrived. When I finally got in the car, we drove off in complete silence. I was in shock. What happened next was strange. It was as if my brain had blocked it all out. I refused to talk about it, even to Riley. To me, it was as if it had never happened. But no matter how hard I try to forget, there are times, like now, when all the horrible details come flooding back to me, and I can't help but think about what could have been the last day of my life. This story happened to me recently, and seriously, it still gives me chills just thinking about it. It all started when my family and I were on our way to college. It was my move-in day, since I was just starting my first semester. We got there, and I learned that I would be living in a Jack and Jill apartment, which basically meant that I would be sharing a bathroom with 3 guys, 2 in one room and me and another roommate in the other. I already knew one of the guys in the other room. We met at orientation and exchanged ideas. But his roommate doesn't even matter in this story. What matters is my roommate, Diora. Before we moved, we switched social media accounts. I tried to chat with him on Instagram to get to know him better. But you know when someone responds in a really dry way? It was him. Plus, his profile looked like one of those Discord mod profiles you see on TikTok, all weird. When we finally met on moving day, guess what? He looked exactly like I imagined. A typical Discord mod, only skinny, my height, super pale, and with a thin, peach-colored mustache. I tried to start a conversation again, but the way he spoke matched exactly the way he typed. He was very shy, stuttered a bit, and tried to end the conversation as quickly as possible. I asked him what kind of music he liked, trying to lighten the mood, but he looked at me seriously and said, "Music doesn't fill the void." Pretty weird, right? But things got even weirder when he set up his PS5. The problem wasn't that he was playing, the problem was what he did while he was playing. Diora made strange sounds, like grunts, shook his whole body and laughed out of nowhere while pressing the buttons on the controller. He would put his feet on the desk cabinet and, every now and then, grab his feet and pull them towards his body, as if he were in a trance. And, while playing alone or with friends online, he would whisper to himself, repeating what he said twice with a strange little laugh. He stayed in his room 24 hours a day, never left and barely did his homework. I swear, just seeing him move like that scared me a lot when I tried to sleep. But the worst was yet to come. The first week, I went out with some friends I met in my dorm, and I came back late, like 1 a.m. When I entered the room, I saw that Diora was lying on the bed, as if he were sleeping. I walked past him and went to my locker, which was next to my bed. It was then that I felt the hairs on my arms stand on end, a feeling that something was wrong. I turned around, and there he was, staring at me with a weird smile on his face. I yelled, "Dude, what are you doing? Why are you looking at me like that?" He laughed in a sinister way and said, "Dark hour," and then turned to the wall as if nothing had happened. That completely froze me. And the worst part? This happened 3 more times. I tried to move to another room, but the college said they didn't have any vacancies. I tried to move to the other guy's room, but he didn't want to move either. So I was stuck with Diora for the entire semester. And believe me, I just had to deal with it. About 3 months had passed since I moved out, and one day after my English class, I went back to the dorm. When I opened the door, my roommate, Diora, stood up suddenly, looking panicked, asking why I had come back so early. I thought it was strange because my class ended late and, as usual, I came back late. I asked if he wanted the room to himself for some reason, but he posed strange, like something you see in anime, and said, "Don't worry about it, no way." That made me even more uncomfortable. I looked at him and noticed that there was a box on the table. When I asked about the box, he got all weird and said it wasn't important. At that moment, I didn't pay much attention and shrugged. But then I noticed that my iPhone charger and scissors were missing. I asked if he had seen them, and he said yes, so he picked up the scissors and handed them to me. When he went to give me the charger, the cable ended up hitting his box, which fell to the floor and opened. What I saw inside made my heart race. A sticky note with my name on it fell to the floor, and next to it was a transparent box with some bizarre things inside. Inside were false eyelashes, a pair of glasses, one of my socks, and a picture of myself that I had taken as a joke and left lying around. I was paralyzed for a second, not believing what I was seeing. Diora started picking up everything from the floor, trying to come up with an explanation, but I wouldn't listen. I yelled at him to get out of the room. He left right away without saying anything else. Still shaking with anger and disgust, I texted my RA, dorm manager, explaining the situation. He said he was out of town at the moment, but would be back the next day. He asked me to keep the box as evidence so he would have a reason to kick Diora out. I grabbed the box and hid it in my laundry basket. I was completely shaken. Just thinking about what had just happened gave me a horrible feeling. But to make matters worse, an hour later Diora came back to the room. I just told Diora to stay away from me and not to say anything. After that, we didn't say a word. I tried to stay awake, afraid that he would go look for the box. But I was so tired that I ended up falling asleep around 2 a.m. When I woke up, Diora was no longer there. It was the first time I had seen him outside of the room, and that gave me relief. But then I remembered the box. I ran to my laundry basket where I had hidden the box, and it was gone. Panicked. It wasn't long before my RA, dorm manager, knocked on the door. I let him in and told him everything that had happened. He believed me, but said that he couldn't do anything without the box as proof. He said that without it, it would be just my word against Diora's. I felt lost, like I was losing my mind. The RA left, and about 5 hours later, Diora came back. I got straight to the point and asked him what he had done with the box. He pretended he didn't know what I was talking about, with that innocent look on his face. "What box? I have no idea what you're talking about," he said. I kept insisting, but he just denied it. I couldn't stand looking at him anymore or being in the same room. Now we're in the second semester, And yes, unfortunately, I'm still Diora's roommate. He told me he would never do something like that again, and that if he did, he would let me know and we would sort it out. I believed him, but the truth is that I can barely stay in the room. I avoid him as much as I can. He still scares me. The worst part is that sometimes I can't even sleep or concentrate during the day. I keep thinking about what was in that box. Why did he steal my photo? Why did he take my socks? What were those glasses for? But what creeps me out the most are the eyelashes, and the fact that he put my name on the box. To this day, I don't understand why. This happened to me in my freshman year of college in 2019. I'm already a graduate, but I always remember this story around Halloween. My college always had crazy parties during Halloween week. It was a big school and there were costume parties every day. Even the bars made us dress up. It was all pretty crazy. Lots of drinking, police everywhere, and unforgettable memories. This story happened on the Saturday of Halloween week. Our football team had won a big game, and my friends and I were heading to an off-campus fraternity party to celebrate. One of my friends, Alexandro, was dating a guy on the team, so we knew it was going to be a big party. We got there around 11 p.m., and things were already pretty hectic. Everyone was drinking heavily, and people were singing songs making fun of the school we had beaten in the game. I was taking shots and dancing with my friends, having a great time. It's worth noting that my phone was dead, and I had given it to Alexandra to keep in her purse. Later, I told my friends that I was going to the bathroom and to wait for me near the DJ booth. By this point, we were all pretty drunk. While I was in the bathroom, I heard someone from the fraternity yell, "Police!" really loudly, and then chaos broke out. Everyone started screaming and running out of the house. I ran along, and when I got out, I saw several police cars with their lights flashing everywhere. People were running in all directions, trying to escape. Some of the officers were talking to the fraternity brothers, while others were trying to catch anyone who was underage. In the midst of the commotion, I realized that I didn't have my phone. I started yelling for my friends, but I couldn't find them in the crowd. I knew it would be impossible to find them there, so I decided to try to get home. The problem was that I was drunk and had no idea how to get there. That fraternity house was quite far from campus, in a different area than the others. All I knew was that I needed to get out of there as quickly as possible. I started walking home and, boy, it was freezing, and it was only October. The temperature was 3 degrees Celsius. I was still a little dizzy from the drinking, but I could still make out everything around me. After a while, I realized that I needed a break to warm up and, if I was lucky, maybe even sober up. It was then that I spotted a building that looked like one of the college buildings I had heard about. How cool, I thought, and went over to it. When I opened the door and went inside, I noticed that it was quite dark inside. A few exit signs were glowing at different entrances, illuminating the place a little. After 5 minutes inside that building, I started to feel a little soberer. But to my surprise, I realized that I was not in an academic building, but in a warehouse. Although it was a little warmer, a strange feeling made me nervous. When I went to open the door to leave, I felt a knot in my stomach. It was locked. How is that possible? I thought, how can the door be locked from the inside? So, I decided to head to a nearby door that had an exit sign. I pushed the door open, expecting it to take me outside, but to my surprise, it was just another part of the warehouse. This room was much smaller and was lit by a very dim red light. There was a humming sound from some machine and, to make things even scarier, I saw chains hanging from the ceiling and a bit of steam in the air. Seriously, it looked like a scene from a horror movie. When I tried to go back through the door, I realized that it was also locked behind me. Panic began to take over me, and I was trying not to panic. My head was a mess and I leaned up, trying to think of a way to get out of this strange situation. I was leaning against the wall, sledding down and crying silently. Suddenly, I heard a door slam and footsteps approaching. I stayed quiet, with my eyes wide with fear. I heard another door close and more footsteps approaching my hiding place. My adrenaline rose and, without thinking twice, I looked at the door next to me. With all the care in the world, I opened the door and sneaked in. As I hid, I saw some chains hanging down and steam in the air, like in a horror movie. Then I heard the door to the previous room open and the footsteps got louder and heavier. My heart raced. I knew I had to act fast. I looked up at the window and, in all my fear, kicked the wall 5 times, as if that would give me courage. Suddenly, I heard feet running towards the door. I had maybe 10 seconds before they arrived. Without thinking, I jumped out the window. Little did I realize that on the other side was a high drop, and I landed about 10 feet on top of 2 recycling bins. The impact was hard, but I managed to push myself away, still in shock. I looked back at the window, which was broken, but I didn't see anyone inside. I ran to hide behind some pine trees that were a few feet away. I stayed in the shadows, breathing heavily. When I looked up, I saw a figure peering out the window, looking around for me. My whole body went numb with fear. I tried to be as quiet as possible and crossed the street, running for my life. I don't know how long I ran, but when I finally recognized the side of the campus, my heart lightened a little. I arrived at my dorm and saw my friends waiting for me outside, pale and panicked. They said I had been missing for almost 4 hours. The next day, I sat down with them and told them my entire adventure. One of my friends' mouths hung open as he listened attentively. After we talked, we found out that the building I was in hadn't been used for years. A chill hit me again. The person inside wasn't a police officer or a night security guard. It was a random person. To this day, it still makes me sick. If I hadn't been quiet or thought so quickly, I might not be here now. I tried to find more information about that place, but nothing came up. That experience remains the scariest thing that has ever happened to me.